Apollonian Germ. I would like to make a video for you to talk about the method of knowledge. As of now, I am in a calm state of mind, but it's probably not gonna last. So here's the structure of the video. I give you instructions, I share my knowledge with you, so that eventually maybe you might avoid making the mistakes that I made. And you and anyone, but as of now you are the only one who can grasp my truth. So first part, I will talk about the possibility that strange events might occur, actually will occur in the coming time. Second, I will talk about a strange mystical experience that I had in the early month of 2018. Third, I will talk about my relationship with Hegel in the early month of 2018, when Hegel was my hero. Fourth part, I will talk about the official narrative about the history of the cosmos and the universe. The fifth part, I will illustrate a rationalistic perspective on how, I will take the example of the video games Metal Gear Solid, how they came into being according to the official narrative, to illustrate the method of knowledge. And finally, I will conclude. So, the first thing that I have to say, if strange events occur, and strange events will occur, what I ask from you, actually from everyone, but at first I ask this from you, Apollonian Germ, trust spirit. If you have mystical insights, spiritual insights, trust these insights, because spirit is more real than what we ordinarily call reality. And spirit is invisible, immaterial. You can hear eventually the words expressed by spirit through my language, but spirit cannot be seen. It's the immaterial substance. So, yeah. Now I will illustrate. This is the structure of the Encyclopedia, which is the structure of being, actually. Logic, which contains mathematics. Nature, which is physics, biology, physics, chemistry, biology. Subjective spirit, which is, to simplify, anthropology and psychology and consciousness. Objective spirit, which is the realm of institutions and world history. And absolute spirit, which is manifested in art, religion, and philosophy. And if we asked a modern Western man what is truth, he would probably say that truth is mathematical, which is derived from logic, even in the modern view of logic, because Hegel's logic and modern symbolic logic are different. Hegel's logic is speculative and mystical, but the modern Western man would say that truth is logical in a sense of symbolic logic, and mathematical, mathematics, everyone agrees on mathematics, and eventually physics, everyone agrees with the basic laws of physics. But even in the realm of physics, there are debates among physicists between the incompatibility of quantum theory and relativity, the theory of the string theory, the multiverse, the Big Bang, big crunch, big bounce, big freeze, whatever. So the physicists agree on most of the laws of physics, but there are still debates. And then the higher you go into the complexity, in the realm of chemistry, there's a unanimous agreement between chemists and physicists who deal with chemistry, but already the data are much more empirical, so they are much less accurate. It's much more difficult to predict chemical reactions because the complexity is so vast. In biology, broadly people agree on Darwinism. I don't, but we'll talk about this later. Then again, biology is very complex chemistry. So it's the data are even more empirical, it's even more complex, etc. And when we enter the realm of the social sciences, here the notion of truth almost completely disappears. In economics, psychology, IQ, everything is race realism. Those who say there are no races, those who says there are races. So the higher we go, the greater the debates and the questioning. And when you enter the realm of art, modern art, not modern art, but art and modernity is debated by everyone. Religion, people debate about religion, and philosophy is considered to be useless armchair theorizing. So yeah, but in my view, this level of consciousness, which is absolute spirit, is the truth, the absolute truth. It's more real than everything else, more real than nature, more real than institutions, more real than the individual self. It is the absolute truth. So it's a traditionalist view and a revolutionary view to say that philosophy, religion and art are much more true than what stands in between. But actually, in my view, it is just a manifestation of speculative mystical logic. And now I will talk about a very strange experience that I had in the early month of 2018. I will put the link to a video I made on this channel about this experience. I was already very red-pilled to talk like most people do, and I had a mystical experience involving Stella, a young American alt-right girl. I started to discover the unity of Hegel and Marx, the unity of the Joker and Batman in The Dark Knight, Fight Club, the movie Fight Club with the schizophrenia of the main protagonist, Metal Gear Solid, the song Playing God by Paramore, and Paganism, and all this happened in a matter of a few hours, or maybe it was in the same moment or a few days, I don't know, but in a very restricted period of time I had a very powerful mystical experience, the most intense I ever had. And I started to make the connections between Metal Gear Solid, the Japanese video games, which have been popular in the West, paganism as developed by the Thulean perspective, and Hegel's philosophy that I was just discovering. So Metal Gear Solid is a particular determination of art through the mediation of modern pop culture. Paganism is religious, and Hegel's philosophy is philosophy. So when it happened, I kind of, there was a message which said everything is perfectly logical, but it's perfectly logical, or it's perfect logic, it's a logical system. So I was discovering Hegel's logic, and I skipped from this logic directly to a mystical experience without going through the normal process of ordinary reality, the physical world, ordinary perception, consciousness, etc. So I asked myself, what the fuck is happening to me? I started to lose it completely, to doubt the very nature of reality. And what I want to say is that this crazy experience, I had many, but this was the most intense. In my view, nature is the projection of my mind, and spirit, which is whatever is produced by human consciousness, is the coming back into itself of mind. So whatever is spiritual, in the sense of anything produced by man, this pen is a product of Geist, in a way, a product of mind, because it has been produced by a human mind. So it is a spiritual object in this sense, but it is not as spiritual as this book is, for instance, the content, I mean. But that's what Hegel says in his lectures on the philosophy of nature and the philosophy of aesthetics, namely that any production of the human mind has more reality, more truth than nature, because nature is the unconscious manifestation of the idea, whereas the products of spirit are the return of the idea into itself. That's why, just to say, if people read Hegel's aesthetics, Hegel says that the most beautiful landscapes of nature should not be praised, or the most beautiful animals, or the sublime ocean, etc., should be praised as the manifestation of the creation of God, but there are higher creations, namely human institutions, human productions, and eventually art, religion, philosophy. So one should admire nature, the starry sky above, as Kant would say, or the beautiful landscapes of nature, but there are higher levels of spirituality, namely, of divine creativity. And when I had this very powerful experience in the early month of 2018, that's when I started really to seriously question the nature of reality, and to become kind of frightened, because I explored really dark, I had explored really dark in the sense of really depressing regions before in the month of January, but here I was starting to explore really strange, which are also dark, but very strange, very weird regions of the human mind. And I bought this book, Children of the Matrix, about the reptilians, because this was the level of consciousness that I was at. I was starting to wonder, but is the world controlled by extraterrestrial presence? That's the only book of this kind that I ever bought, and I felt kind of ashamed because, yeah, but because I know myself to be a Cartesian in the sense of modern rationalistic Western perspective on science, reason, as we understand this in the West, the need to categorize, classify, verify, hypothesize, experiment, check, quantify, deduce, rationalize, etc. So I have this mind. So the traditional, which is the modern Western mind, confronted by this, you think this is complete nonsense. But I later realized, I'm starting to realize, that Hegel's philosophy is the unity of the rationalistic mind and this kind of what is thought to be nonsense, but actually Hegel's philosophy is the rationalist, not the rationalist, the conceptual understanding of the content of these kinds of books. Simply what is found in this book and in this book is expressed differently in the form. Here it's in the form of pure thought, here it's in the form of images. But there are many people in the West who are losing themselves partly in these spheres, the Illuminati, the reptilians, the Luciferans sects, the all sorts of the elites, the blood of the elites going through the millennia or whatever. It has to be conceptualized, translated into logical categories in order for this to make sense, because the people who do not understand speculative logic at all, who go directly from subjective spirit and objective spirit, I mean the ordinary consciousness, the ordinary person who has a job, pays taxes, raises children, etc., when he goes directly from this point of view to, I would classify this as religion partly, directly in these spheres without the mediation of logic, the conceptualization of nature, the conceptualization of the social life, the institutions, with a philosophical knowledge, he can get lost and start to say a lot of weird stuff. So one has to keep a firm ground, I would say, in rationality as much as we can. So, yeah. And when I had this mystical experience with Metal Gear Solid, it was the early month of 2018, I had just discovered Hegel a few weeks or a couple of months. Hegel was the end of January 2018. I had just discovered Hegel. Discovered in a sense that I knew that he possessed some very important spiritual knowledge. And I asked myself, is there a connection between Hegel's philosophy and science fiction? Is somehow Hegel's philosophy, I knew already that it was speculative, spiritual, that the logic of Hegel was a logic which was beyond itself. I had read somewhere that the reality for Hegel is always ahead of itself and behind itself. So reality is not here, it's always beyond or behind, it's a movement. So I was, yeah. And I started to ask myself, but is there a connection between Hegel's logic that I was just starting to discover and science fiction? And I stumbled upon this book by a French author, Jean-Claude Martin, The Logic of Science Fiction, from Hegel to Philip K. Dick. And I stumbled upon a quote by Philip K. Dick from the Exegesis. I didn't know who Philip K. Dick was. I never heard of him. I later realized that he's the one who wrote Minority Report and Blade Runner, I think, the novel which inspired Blade Runner. But I had no knowledge of Philip K. Dick, so I bought the Exegesis. I never read Philip K. Dick's novels, but I read a lot of the Exegesis. And there's this sentence, this quote, from officially February 1977, God develops himself toward perfection through history, dialectically, and the goal of history is the growth of human freedom. Thus I learned to my delight that most of what I experienced, saw, and learned in March 74 confirms Hegel, and I am thus a Hegelian, which is fine with me. So March 74 refers to, in the world of Philip K. Dick, a crazy mystical experience when he identified himself as God, basically. There are moments in his book where he says, I am God. So God, in the official view, God was born or was made present in 1974 in the United States through the mind of Philip K. Dick. But this view might be doubted, and I doubt this seriously. But to say that I am a Hegelian, basically 150 years after the death of Hegel, because I envisioned then that Hegel was the German speculative thinker of early 19th century Germany, how could a mind say broadly 150 years after the death of a philosopher, say my most crazy speculative, my most crazy mystical insights confirm the thought of an author who was dead long ago? I found this amazing, this sentence, the idea that reality might be in adequation with the thought of a thinker long dead. I found this absolutely amazing. And that's when I started to develop my tremendous admiration for Hegel, because Hegel was mind-blowingly intelligent. How could he anticipate Philip K. Dick, science fiction, paganism, Metal Gear Solid? That was amazing. My perspective on Hegel would change, but at this moment I was in full admiration of Hegel. And then Philip K. Dick, the official story is that he had this experience in 1974 and he spent the remaining 8 years of his life until 1982 commenting, analyzing, researching, inquiring about what had happened to him. He tried to understand. And most of my life consists in trying to understand some of the mystical experiences that I had in 2018, but especially the experience that I had in August 2018 when I identified myself with God, basically. And most of my life, although there have been passages where I forgot, but I've been an attempt to understand what happened to me at this moment. And the third part, but I already talked about this. Hegel in the early months of 2018 was my hero, and I tried to imitate my hero. Namely, he says in most of his books, we should elevate ourselves in the realm of pure thought, detach ourselves from representations, and to try to think in pure abstraction without the interference of the sensuous world, but think in terms of pure categories. That's what I tried to do, but I had no formal background in philosophy, so I struggled. It took me a long time, and I couldn't help but use images to express what I thought I understood about Hegel. So the piece of advice that I can give to anyone, but here I'm talking directly to Apollonian Germ because he's the one that I focus my mind upon. If and when strange events, coincidences, synchronicities, mystical insights, spiritual insights occur, trust them. If the craziest, weirdest things happen in your mind, like it happened in my mind, you will maybe say in the beginning, what the fuck? What the fuck? But trust this absolute spirit, even if it kind of interferes with ordinary rationality, and it will eventually. Trust speculative logic. So if weird experiences occur in the coming weeks, here's my piece of advice. Keep calm as long as you can, and trust my logic, which is the logos, speculative logic. So yeah. Then, fourth part, my experience of reason of August 2018, namely the certainty that I have of being the whole of reality. The first question that I ask myself is, how could the world exist prior to my consciousness? If I am certain that the world exists for the mediation of my consciousness, how do you explain that there are people who are older than me? There is a historical process, there is an earth, buildings, there is an entire world which exists independently of me at first. But if I adopt the idealist perspective, how do I explain the presence of the world? That's a question that I have not yet been able to answer. But the official narrative about the story of the universe is, I simplify, 13 billion years ago, the Big Bang, the appearance of physics, which is mathematically and eventually logically determined. So already in the rationalistic, atheistic perspective, we already have at the foundation, the ground of reality, logic and mathematics. And eventually it is being made manifest through physics. It's a different kind of logic than Hegel's logic, but even for atheist, modern empirical physicists, reality is, which they identify with physical reality, is mathematically and eventually logically structured. So then chemistry, the formation of heavy atoms, the formation of planets, galaxies, solar systems, etc. The Earth is being formed, the Sun, our solar system, and then broadly 4 billion years ago, chemical reactions occur and life emerges. That's the beginning of biology, and through a Darwinian process of natural selection, some 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerges, and then there's the divergence into the various races, and history begins broadly 5,000 years ago, in 3000 BCE in Egypt or Mesopotamia. There's the Neolithic revolution in broadly 10,000 years prior to BCE. Then history 5,000 years ago. I simplify to the utmost. This is the official narrative. And this official narrative is, of course, coherent. It can be rationalistically explained. There are a chain of causes, reactions, evolution, development. It can be categorized and understood. So in this sense, physical cosmology and Darwinism is rationalistic. It's not rational necessarily in the sense of Hegel, because it's not possible from a Hegelian perspective, but from an atheistic perspective, it makes sense. Darwinism has a very powerful explanatory factor on human behavior. Evolutionary psychology is a very powerful tool to explain human behavior. And now I will illustrate my method of knowledge. When I had my mystical experience connecting speculative logic, Metal Gear Solid, Paganism, and Hegel, I did not understand anything about what was happening. What the fuck? What the fuck is happening? But I realized many years later, with experience, cognitive development, intellectual growth, etc., that if we wanted to understand how the video games Metal Gear Solid came into being from a rationalistic, atheistic perspective, it would be made possible by saying that the story of cosmology and then the story of the formation of the earth and the climates and the emergence of the Japanese people, and I will here simplify to the utmost just to illustrate that if we want to adopt an atheistic perspective on the development and the coming into being of Metal Gear Solid, we would have to say that cosmology, etc., and then the climate and geography of Northern Asia has produced the anthropological determinations of the Japanese people, or what would become the Japanese people, and it has shaped, in this Darwinian perspective, it has shaped their folk soul, or their Volkgeist, namely the soul of their people, or the spirit of their people, which is different from, here I will speak as a European, different from our folk soul, and there are then various folk souls between the various European nations, but the universal is the world soul, or the world spirit of mankind, but it particularizes itself into the various Volkgeist. A Japanese has a universality in common with every other humans, because he is made in the image of God, but his particularity differentiates him from all other particulars. A Japanese is not a Chinese, he's not a German, he's not a Nigerian, etc., etc. He has a folk soul of his own, that each individual Japanese reflects more or less, depending on the various determinations of his anthropology. Then we would have to talk about the history of Japanese institutions, so that's the realm of objective spirit, and then eventually history, how, I simplify to the utmost, in 19th century British imperialism opened up Japan, forced Japan to awaken commercially, to enter the then developing globalization of commerce, so to speak. That brought forth the rise to power of Japan, militarily, economically. The attempt to restore the disruption brought forth by modernization produced kind of a Japanese brand of fascism, the imperial power of Japan in the 1930s, basically. It was not strictly speaking fascism, but it was a brand of fascism. They were defeated in World War II, which would play an important role in the mind of Hideo Kojima, relating to the problem of war, etc. And then, because they could no longer express their will to power, or their creativity, or their talent, or their expression in the realm of military conquest, they, like the Germans, they chose, because they had no choice, to focus on economic development. And this is what brought forth the economic miracle of Japan in the 1950s and 60s. After they had been severely harmed by the war, they had an economic miracle, like Germany, and they became an economic superpower. An economic power, a very powerful and very wealthy nation, and they focused their creativity and their high IQ into technology, and it became, and has ever been, a country of technological development. And here there are countless of books written by Western scholars and probably Japanese scholars about this history, the history of Japan, the history of the Japanese people, the history of the 20th century in Japan, the history of the economic development. Economists talk about this. So this process that I simplify in a few minutes is being made manifest within being by countless of books and thoughts and TV, not TV shows, but not movies either, but videos, the speeches which talk about this. Probably on Japanese TV they talk about this daily or very often, how Japan became such a developed nation, etc., etc. So this is knowledge being brought forth within being. So in this sense it is rational. And also we would have to talk about class struggle in the West, also the development of capitalism, which up to a certain level allowed greater leisure time for the workers. So it's a combination of Marxism and capitalism which enabled the workers in the Western world to enjoy a higher quantity of leisure, which also capitalism and with the mixture of socialism in the West brought prosperity. And this is what enabled the Westerners since the 1980s to be able to play video games, the technological development and the economic conditions. And then, still to explain Metal Gear Solid from this rationalistic perspective, Japanese try to please an American audience, a Western but mostly American audience. They want to conquer the American market, so they use white heroes, because they think that Americans want to be pleased by showing the charismatic and strong white figure. In the case of Metal Gear, it's Solid Snake. But because they do not have the taboo of race that we, here I speak as a Western, that we have in the West. So they do not necessarily understand that in the West everything is done to try to bring down the figure of the charismatic white hero, But the Japanese, they are not necessarily aware of this because they do not live in the constant leftist mindset of white self-hatred. So most of the characters in Japanese video games are white and Aryan whites. So yeah, that's not not completely irrelevant detail. That is actually important. And then we would have to explain the emergence of Hideo Kojima, his personal history, but also his genius and his creativity, which enabled him to produce the saga Metal Gear, which is considered to be very deep, most notably MGS2, because there is very profound ideas, and MGS5 deals with important questions about world stability, language, etc. I have not played this game, but the trailers are pretty impressive. And yeah, so that's what I had to say. And that's just how this could be explained from a rationalistic, atheistic, modern perspective. So if I had had the time, the knowledge, the intellectual growth to do this, but here is I've done this in a few minutes, but it could be, you could write entire books to explain how this came into being. But and the same could be said, how do you explain the revival of paganism in modern Europe? You would have to tell the story of the entire Western world in the 20th century, the modern media, etc. So that's not the purpose, but I'm just trying to explain that the what the fuck moment, the immediate transition between a new kind of logic and a mystical experience in the realm of modern pop culture dealt with, mixed with religion and philosophy, it completely disrupted my mind. I didn't know where I was, and I got lost in very weird and very strange places. So what I'm trying to share is that Apollonian Germ, if you watch this, as long as you can, as long as you experience yourself as a singular individual with a free will, try to rationalize and to conceptualize whatever happens. Try to keep calm and to think logically, but knowing that it will not always be possible to take the time to rationalize. If there are very strange occurrences which happen, and eventually it will happen, trust what seems to you as speculative logic. If you have really weird occurrences, trust spirit, trust speculative logic, because spirit is more real than what we ordinarily call reality. And I will conclude by saying that in my next videos, not the next one, but starting maybe tomorrow or after, I will talk to you, Apollonian Germ, by using trailers from Metal Gear Solid, and hopefully it will help you awaken, and it will be what cultural Hegelianism was supposed to be. Philosophy, religion, and art, or modern pop culture, because I've just realized that if I do not implement the religious and cultural aspect, if I just remain in the pure spheres of abstraction, if I just try to imitate Hegel, I will fail, because Hegel already exists, so to speak. The books already exist. The best I can do is to comment the books which I have done on this channel, to try to show that I understand Hegel very well, not completely, because it's a very difficult thinker to understand, but I understand him better than most scholars understand his works. But eventually I will have to add my own touch to the process, so I will do things my own way, because this is the only way I know. So yeah, that's what I had to say. So trust spirit. If you get my message, trust spirit.